Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Cody Heimann, and we are going to have a fun day talking about wireless here. We're going to go ahead and try to get things started. We're going to give people a few minutes to hop in this live stream. And kind of just wanted to talk through everything about wireless today and in relation to Nexus. Talk about some wireless best practices and things like that. Just trying to get everything started up here. All right. We should be looking pretty good now. So, as you guys can tell, I am not Paul Isaacs or Gary Trenda, but I did talk to Gary Trenda this morning. So, if that counts for anything, I hope so. All right, we'll probably give it maybe 2 more minutes here and just let people kind of funnel in. One thing I did want to let everybody know is we do have the chat function here in YouTube. So any questions you guys have as we kind of go through, feel free to put them in there. We've got some people at the Sound Devices Mothership looking at that and funneling questions there, trying to help you guys out so we can keep up. And we're also going to have this posted after the fact. So if you do miss anything or want to kind of come back on anything, it should be on demand in the Sound Devices YouTube page. All right. We're funneling in here, which is good. Appreciate everyone being here, whether it's early in the morning or late in the day or night, wherever you are at. We are very much appreciative of you guys joining us here today. We do have a couple pre-submitted questions as well, so I'll get to those near the end. If you were one of those that sent in some questions there, we'll try to work on that part too. This is going to be, we're going to try to keep this to an hour. So I'm going to start pushing through a lot of things pretty quickly, just so we've got time at the end for questions. But hopefully we should be able to get you guys some really good information in that hour to go utilize out in the field. So, all right, we're about 5 minutes in. I think we got a good audience here. Let's go ahead and get things started so we can kind of maximize our time here. So, sound devices. My name is Cody Heimann. I am the NRF technical specialist for sound devices. I work as primarily a RF coordinator. So out in the field, I work on large scale one-off events, festivals, corporate shows, things of that nature, where we've got larger scale channel counts and large coordinations are needed. I also tech and support other RF techs on shows as well. So large shows that might have lots of microphones that need to be ran around and capsule changes or, different settings moved. We can support them, in that kind of endeavor. So lots of different hats in the RF space, but some of the events I've worked on and a little bit who I am and why we're kind of going through things today. So I know we got a bunch of people in here that are not as familiar with Sound Devices, but they do know that Sound Devices is doing some fantastic things in the RF space. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with Sound Devices, they are a worldwide leader in the design and manufacture of the professional audio products for a wide range of applications in film, TV, and more. Sound Devices specializes in mixer recorders and wireless microphone products, receiving industry awards and recognition from the likes of the CAS and the AMPS. So these guys have been around for a really long time. They make absolutely fantastic products, and most things that you've seen on TV and movies, they're all a part of, and they've been supporting that industry for a very, very long time. Founded in 1998, so 25th anniversary for Sound Devices. Based out in Madison, Wisconsin. All products designed in the US and the UK. Manufacturing facilities in both of those, as well as Taiwan. World leader in location sound recording. And again, just really world renowned for their audio fidelity and just super, super high quality product builds. Just a couple movies and projects you might have seen them on, real small things. So if you haven't heard of them, don't worry about it. And there's a fantastic picture of the manufacturing plant in Reedsburg. So just a little overview there about me, about Sound Devices. So now we can really kind of dive into the meat of this webinar. So let's talk about wireless audio. Let's talk about getting ready for a show, getting ready for a shoot, anything of the sort, right? I think all these kind of play along, even though they're different mediums of our industry. I think they're all kind of the same thing. We're all using gear. We all have the same goal in mind, and that's for a successful execution of whatever our entertainment, modality, medium, whatever you want to call it is. So in my opinion, pre-production is the common denominator in all of those, right? Whether we're going to a soundstage, whether we're going to a festival site, whether we're going to a convention center, we got to have pre-production done. We got to know what we're getting into, how we're going to utilize what gear we have, and what things we kind of need to do to make it work. So as far as pre-production goes, what do we use to make that deployment successful? How are we going to use these tools in pre-production to make sure that we're being efficient in our workflow and also successful? First thing, and most importantly, I believe, is coordination software, right? What are you using? Is it coordinated together? What are other things surrounding you that you know about that you can coordinate in to help any of that ancillary stuff not affect your gig and vice versa? Great resources out there. IES is intermodulation analysis software. EasyRF is another one. Soundbase makes one now called Chord. Wireless Workbench, etc. So we've got plenty of applications, plenty of software that can kind of help us get through a lot of that stuff. A spectrum analyzer. If you own a Nexus, whether you know it or not, or rent a Nexus, you have a spectrum analyzer. There are also some handheld ones out there. There's some tabletop ones, all sorts of different price ranges from low to high. Tektronix makes a fantastic one. I usually use a Signal Hound on my shows. RF Explorer has been a really common one that we've seen. And again, just so many other options. But a spectrum analyzer is going to allow you to look at your wireless spectrum that is surrounding you in that physical location, right? So everywhere you go is going to have different wireless spectrum. It's going to have different things that are operating there, and you need to know what that is and why it's there and how much it plays into the space that you're able to utilize for your microphones or your IFBs or your in-ears or anything you're using that's wireless. So the spectrum analyzer is kind of your eye into that realm, and it's a super powerful tool. Information database. So what do we have for gear? How long are we using it? Where are we using it? These are all things that inevitably are going to come up while we're on site that someone's going to need to know, right? Whether it's another soundstage nearby that wants to know what gear you're operating, whether it's another band that's coming into your festival, whether it's an E&G crew coming into a convention, all the above. If you've got this stuff done in advance and you know what you're operating, how you're operating it, I even go as deep as telling them about power levels and all that kind of stuff, just so I don't have to mess with that on site and I'm able to kind of send that out as needed. It's just a really helpful tool, and it also kind of helps you visualize what you're doing before you get to your gig as well. And then accessories, right? How are we going to build out the system? Are you going to use anything out of the ordinary to help support your show? Are you going to use any external filters, amplifiers? You know, what are we going to do to make sure that our system is absolutely as robust as it can possibly be? Now, you're going to a show. Maybe it's outside of the town you live in. It's outside of the city you live in. You know, how do you prepare for that? How do you know what's going to happen? You're not there to physically utilize your spectrum analyzer. You don't know anyone there. You've never been there before. So how do you even get started in pre-production? Well, we're looking for scans, and if you don't have one, never fear. It will not be the dumpster fire that is imagining in your head right now. There are resources, and there are fantastic things we can utilize to help us with that. Scan databases. Here's a few of them that I'm aware of that I use quite frequently. These, you can basically log into any of these websites. As far as I know, all of these are free too. You log into any of these, they all have resources. You can type in your location, where you're going, and it'll give you, basically a dated scan, and should have also some information on where it was taken, right? Was it inside of our soundstage? Was it outside in the parking lot? Was it in the basement of a convention center? These are all things to know and that you really want to have as information on that scan, because all that's going to drastically change your scan, right? If you're going to be in the basement of a convention center, your RF is going to be a lot more versatile than if you were out in the parking lot, right? And then it's going to be, you're going to have a lot more information coming in on a parking lot. You're going to have a lot more stuff you got to dodge. So you really want to know where the scan was taken, and again, how long ago it was taken. A lot of these are being updated very regularly, but you definitely want to check the date, because if it's a post repack, scan, then we want to make sure that, we're doing our due diligence to look at what kind of happened post repack as well. So things change all the time, and we just want to make sure we know what's going on there. So next, we're going to kind of take a look into the USA spectrum, where we can kind of utilize things, and some fun places to kind of use some wireless in that maybe not as many people do, and all that kind of stuff. So common spectrum for wireless audio devices in the US. So I know we've got some folks from outside of the US on this thing, but I work a lot here, and so I just wanted to make sure that it was kind of known in some areas that we've got here. We do have a lot of resources, though, especially inside of the Nexus, if you have one or rent one, that gives you some great insight on what you're allowed to use within the spectrum that you have available to you wherever you are at. So just take a look at a couple quick things here. These are some areas that you may or may not know that you can utilize. So our VHF spectrum, our UHF spectrum, and what kind of power levels we can also utilize there. That's one really big thing that we kind of commonly see, is that everyone kind of imagines that you can just go high power everywhere, or what you can kind of utilize where in the spectrum you're at. So really want to make sure that we're respecting that and understanding what we can use and where. But definitely some things to talk about in that realm. But with your Nexus or with other Astral series products, you're going to be able to cover almost all of this. So they now have VHF on a lot of the Astral stuff, UHF, and tons of different areas. So this list right here in the US is really a great guide to kind of have an idea of what's being used where. This is more of a visual representation of what we're looking at. So we hear a lot of things. We may not know what they mean. So we hear duplex gap, we hear guard band, we hear UHF, we hear VHF, uplink, downlink. So just one thing we really wanted to kind of drive home on this slide was what some of that stuff means. So if we are looking, and I believe we can see my mouse on this here, we have what's called the duplex gap here between 652 and 663. Some of this is licensed and unlicensed, right? So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to what, again, we're utilizing if you're not licensed and if you are. But this section between our wireless uplink and downlink is a great section to utilize. We also have the guard band here before we start our downlink section. And then all of this 470 to 608 is our standard UHF in the US. So again, just trying to show you guys where we can kind of utilize some things, some different areas, and kind of what some of those words are referencing. So another one that we may have heard, but we don't necessarily know about is T-band. So T-band in the US is public safety two-way radio operating in UHF. So some cities have this, some cities do not, and it's primarily different in every city. But we're always utilizing that lower end of the spectrum. So you're going to see a common denominator of TV channel 14 and 15. But this is a really important list we want to look at. A lot of people are utilizing some of these spaces because at first shot, it appears clean. Maybe on a spectrum analyzer, you're seeing some things happening in it and some parts of it look clean. But that's because it's the utilization of two-way radio in there. So you may not see some of it sometimes, and you may see it completely packed sometimes. But the important part to know about this is those channels in those cities are actually not available for use with wireless microphones. So we really want to make sure that we're paying attention to this, and again, trying to make sure that a lot of these things that we keep commonly hearing and utilizing over and over to the best practices that we can. Hopefully I'm covering a lot of this pretty well. Again, I'm trying to not necessarily fly through this, but I really want to get home a lot of information here. So again, if you guys have questions and you kind of want to know a little more about this, please, again, make sure that you're putting this stuff in the chat so we can dive into it a little further. Let's move on here. So what do we mean when we say licensed for using wireless mics or licensed operation? We've got two different ways that this is kind of utilized. So Part 15 is your unlicensed utilization of wireless mics. So one big thing, again, that I was kind of referring to earlier is the power level, right? We're not exceeding 50 milliwatts in the UHF spectrum with this one. So that's the big part you want to take home with this. There's a ton of verbiage and what we should be and should not be utilizing with that. Would very much encourage everyone, if you use a wireless mic, just to dive into this a little bit, kind of understand what this stuff means a little further. But then the next part of this is our licensed operation side. So the FCC, if you submit into the FCC and they deem you appropriately able to use this license, it's called a Part 74, and it will give you some I don't want to say advantages, but some tools to be able to utilize within your wireless spectrum to really kind of help in some more maybe dense or not as agile scenarios that you find yourself in. So the biggest one on this first line here is up to a quarter watt or 250 milliwatts in the UHF spectrum, 470 to 608. So very big power difference there. And then another thing regardless of where you're at and what license you have, the biggest one that I also want people to know is the bottom line item there is we are still a secondary user to any Part 73 licensed broadcast station. So again, tons of things that you want to kind of know better with a lot of this stuff, but when we're talking about how to advance a show and we're talking about where we want to use things, knowing how far away our transmitters are going to be from our receiver or our antenna infrastructure, knowing what other kind of environments we're going to be in. These things are all part of the plan, right? What kind of power range can I use? Do I have a license or not? Can I be in this part of the spectrum? What's going to help me execute as good as possible in any facet of what we're doing? So a couple really great notes there, and kind of moving along here now to deployment. So when we get on site, usually if you are doing on location, you're going to kind of have a mad dash to get things going on sometimes, even if you're in the corporate or the festival world, right? Sometimes buses run late, sometimes load-ins get pushed, you name it, across the board. Sometimes things just get chaotic, so we just kind of throw and go, if you will. But there are a lot of things that we can do, even in a rush, that can really help us make the robust deployment that we need to have to be able to have a successful RF system. So we're going to cover a few of those topics in here, what we can kind of do to help out with that, and if we've got extra time, some things we can do and how we can plan for that as well. So this is a deployment factor, but we also kind of put this into pre-production, which is why I had this as the first slide. So band planning, where are we going to put things in the spectrum? Right? If you have more than microphones, if you've got IFBs, if you've got in-ear monitors, radios, whatever you've got, these all need to be very intently put in specific places. This is just an example of a band plan, a very large band plan. Odds are you're not going to have, this many things, or if you do, this is not necessarily where these have to go. This is just an example of one. So what we're talking about on this is basically separating transmitters and receivers to be able to have the most agile working environment possible. When we separate those, they're able to work a little better, and we can utilize filtering and all sorts of different things to make sure that they don't interrupt one another, intermod with one another, all that kind of stuff. So we really want to make sure that we're utilizing a band plan. If possible, in my workflow, again, this doesn't work really all the time or most of the time even, but if I can, I always want to try to separate at least by one DTV station between my IFBs and my in-ears, or my transmits and my receives, if you will. That's the personal buffer that I really like, but you just want to make sure that you're separating those and you've got an idea. So if you get things added mid-show or mid-shoot, you also know where you can put things, right? We don't want to just kind of randomly place things across our spectrum for spectral efficiency, for, everything to be utilized in our calculation software, all that kind of stuff. So making sure that you're really separating this stuff, I think, is really just as important as anything else you're doing, because you need to have a game plan of what you're going to do when you get there. So that way we're as efficient as we can be. So antenna types. Probably one of my favorite parts of this is kind of selecting your infrastructure per basis, right? Per gig, per show, per event. I know a lot of people have access to one antenna or think that one antenna is the best or whatever, but there's really different flavors for every different scenario we have out there. We're going to cover a few of these. Why some of them are different than others, why some of them are better for different situations. But no one antenna is going to be the perfect thing for every scenario out there. So the first thing we're going to look at is just kind of our standard whip. It's going to be referred to as a dipole antenna. Predominantly narrow band, right? You're not going to see a lot of these covering a huge range. And we're looking at an omnidirectional kind of pattern for this, right? So if you see in that graphic down there, it's almost covering like a donut shape rather than a full sphere. And so that's kind of one thing you want to look at, right? Where is this antenna covering, and what kind of pattern is it going to utilize when it's deployed? You also see a number on here, 2.15 dBi. So that's basically the passive gain that this antenna is going to give to you. So as we're kind of looking at these, you're going to want to notice the difference in the patterns on these and the difference in passive gain that you get out of these antennas. So our directional antenna is a shark fin, LPDA. You're going to hear a lot of different words in reference to what this antenna is, but you see it a lot. Very common antenna. A lot of manufacturers that make this. Generally, this is going to cover 470 to 700. So in your pre-planning process, again, you really want to make sure that if you're selecting an area of the spectrum that's outside of your standard UHF, that you also have the equipment to support it, right? If you're not using a Nexus, do you have gear that actually tunes into that range? Do you have an antenna that's going to cover appropriately in that range? And how are we going to make all of that stuff work together? One thing you're going to notice here is now we're talking about, since this is not an omnidirectional polar pattern, that now we're going to have some rear rejection as well. So, maybe you've got a ton of RF in a building behind you. Maybe you've got a ton of different, you've got, let's say, a bunch of environmental stuff coming in that you're aware of that's behind you, or just physically in a different location. You can utilize rear rejection for your antenna to try to get rid of some of that information. If you point this antenna directly at another device, it's going to pick it up far more than it would be if you would have the null point or the rear rejection of this antenna facing that other equipment. So little bits of tips and tricks there that you can utilize to try to help your environment, especially if you're in a really noisy or busy environment. 6 dB of passive gain on this one. So now we're increasing in our system there gradually as we're selecting these antennas and looking at that. And a more narrow beam width, right? So we're looking at 70 degrees on this again, instead of the full omnidirectional. Our next antenna is one you may or may not have seen, or if you have, maybe it's a little less. So these are examples of helical antennas. They are circularly polarized. So again, paying a lot of attention to the frequency bandwidth that we have here. I do want to point out too, that I failed to mention on the last two antennas is, you can always look at the ranges of these. There's different manufacturers that make antennas that support different ranges. So I know I've only shown you examples right now so far that I've looked at UHF, but for instance, this helical you can get in like the 900 range, right? So you can look at what manufacturers are out there that support antenna manufacturing and what kind of ranges they've got for the area that you're going to utilize. One thing I didn't mention too in the omnidirectional antennas, going back, was your bow tie style antennas are also going to be put into, actually let me go back a sec, into this category. So your standard bow tie antenna is also going to fall into this, sort of omnidirectional antenna. Now, the Monarch that comes with the Nexus is not a narrowband antenna, right? So that's just another example of making sure that you're aware of what your manufacturer is actually speccing out these antennas for. So going back to this, this is an example of two different styles of helicals. So a 4-turn and a 2-turn helical. So what you're going to notice there is a big increase in our passive gain. And also our rear rejection on these. The benefit of the 2-turn as compared to the 4-turn is that you're going to get a wider beam pattern on that. So maybe you need to cover a shorter distance, but kind of a wider, a wider range. You might want to look at something like that. Or if you need a more narrow range and you're going to shoot something that's a little further away, maybe you want to utilize something like that. So a bunch of different options here, a bunch of different ways to utilize antennas, and a bunch of reasons why we're going to select these for, different applications. Okay, so now we're in deployment. We're on site, we have our gear out and deployed, and we're still having some challenges, right? We've looked at clean spectrum, we've looked at the right antenna. We've looked at everything so far, and we believe we've done everything right. We're still getting dropouts. We're still maybe not having the success we want in our range. A lot of those kind of, common things that are going to come up. So why are some of these things going to come into play? Well, a lot of the times, it's going to be antenna placement. Where these antennas are at are such a big part of your infrastructure that we really want to be very diligent on what we're doing there. So the first thing is obviously metal. Metal is going to drastically affect the response of that antenna. So any inside of a metal enclosure, touching any metal, being very close to metal, maybe you're mounting it inside of a truss, something like that, right? You've got minimal places where you can actually get your antennas. You really want to be very intent on where you're going to put that and trying to avoid metal areas as much as possible. Touching external surfaces too, or line of sight, right? This is a really, really big one. If our transmitter can see the antenna, in theory, that's a best practice. A lot of things come into play with that, but line of sight is always something we want to try to make sure that we're putting into our best practices. Inadequate spacing, right? So if they're super close together, the real theory behind it is minimum of one wavelength is kind of what we want between our antennas. So there's calculators out there where you can really figure out what that minimum distance is. I can be probably corrected on this, but I believe 3 feet is about an average. A foot and a half is about an average on that, based on what frequency you're using as your center point there. But really, what we're trying to drive home is trying to get these spaced out really nice, so each side of your antenna diversity can be getting and receiving different reflections that are being put out by your transmitters. That's kind of the point of that, right? So we want to make sure that we've got a lot of these things in mind while we're putting our deployment in, while we've got our load in happening, and even while we're in show, right? Constantly looking at the stuff, making sure they're not bumped, making sure they haven't been moved around. No one's turned your antenna to put in a light or an LED wall or something like that, and just being super diligent about where these antennas are at all times. Another thing I'd actually add to this too that I forgot to put as a bullet point is if you can get these elevated too, that's always super helpful, right? If you're let's use a corporate scenario, right, where we've got any wireless product sitting on a table, and your front of house console is back there. You're sitting at a table, your wireless is sitting on that same table with the console, and you've got a set of whips on that wireless. Well, once people start walking into that room for that session, everyone's standing up. Maybe it's a packed room and they're standing only. They're standing in front of you, standing in front of the rig. Now you, don't have line of sight to that, and that RF is trying to cut through all those bodies as well, right? Which are all going to affect the wireless in between that room, right? In between your antenna and your transmitter. So if we can elevate these antennas and get them over these people's heads, we're now going to get back everything that we were losing within that density of people, as well as our line of sight. So that's a big thing that we kind of want to drive home with that too. And again, just looking at a lot of that sort of stuff. So let's talk about cable loss. All cable is not treated the same, and this is a very common thing, right? We want to look at what types of cable we're using and at what length we are using these cables. They're going to affect how the overall loss of RF information to your receiver. A lot of people don't know this, right? It's all antenna cable is created equal is not the case. So here are 4 pretty common types of antenna cable that you'll see out in the field. On the shielding of that antenna, you should be able to read what type of cable that is. Again, in your pre-planning, making sure you're speccing the best cable you can if you have that luxury. Or if you own cable, maybe looking at the price differences of what lengths you're going to be utilizing versus what kind of loss you're getting. All things that you kind of want to weigh in and weigh out as far as what you're going to be getting and how you're going to be utilizing it. So let's look at an RG58 cable. 25 feet of RG58 cable. you're losing 3.1 dB of that information within that. So, getting up to a 100-foot cable, we're already down 12 dB in our system. Now, if we're looking at going back to our antennas that we were talking about with the passive gain that we're gaining within that system, right? We're kind of always playing a teeter-totter here of trying to maintain nominal in our system, right? So if we're losing 12 dB of loss, if we have 12 dB of loss in our RG58 cable, but we're able to utilize a helical on that, well, now we're trying to get our system closer to nominal than having all of that loss within our system, right? Now, you can go back and forth on how much is too much and all that kind of stuff, but signal to noise within our transmitter receiver combo and infrastructure is always what we're trying to do, is make sure that we always have as much signal to noise as we possibly can to avoid any of those challenges that typically come up in RF. So this is a great chart to look at. Again, this is just a couple examples, but the huge thing we're driving home here is RG58 as compared to like an LMR 400. Over 100 feet, we're only looking at 3.7 dB of loss across that 100 feet. So massive, massive difference there, and a huge tool to kind of utilize. So pre-planning again, how do we get this stuff? Do we have access to this stuff? What kind of environment we're working in, and how we're going to look at all of that stuff is really important. So I really encourage everyone to try to pay attention to a lot of this stuff a lot more. Maybe on your next show, just kind of look at the cable, see what kind of cable you've been using for the last couple of years if you've never looked at it. Try to calculate your system, and figure out how close to nominal you are there. I think I covered this already. Excessive cable length, if your antenna only needs to be 20 feet away from you and we're using a 100-foot cable because that's all we've got, maybe in the future we can try to mitigate that by getting a shorter antenna length to try to get our system more efficient. And then, so here's a big one, right? Jumps between cascade ports. We've all done this, right? Utilizing multiple systems, multiple receivers, all that kind of stuff. If we don't have a distro for our mic system, you can introduce up to 3 dB of insertion loss there with just that cascade port. So we're always subtracting, we're always adding with this kind of stuff, right? What have I put into my system with insertion losses, with cable loss, all that kind of stuff, and what am I gaining back with antennas and proximity and all that kind of stuff. So really want to be calculating a lot of this in advance, and even on show site, right? We can always be tweaking and looking at what we can do better. So, wow. 40 minutes, I think, that I've covered now of just kind of best practices, pre-planning, deployment, a lot of that kind of, just being successful in our environment and being successful in what we're doing with our shows. So let's talk a little bit about the sound devices lineup, right? Why we're giving this talk in regard to RF and sound devices. So the big thing here, whether I know there's some people that we've invited to this that are utilizing A20 Nexus now that, like I was saying in the beginning, maybe don't have as much knowledge of sound devices as a company. Or people that have been on sound devices for years and have always known about their wireless and these fantastic products that they're putting out, and now utilizing the Nexus as well. I want to talk a little bit about it, some of the features. If you're a Nexus Pro user, maybe you get something out of it you didn't know. If you're a Nexus kind of new into the realm, hopefully you get a lot of really good information out of this, and we can kind of just dive into some of these feature sets. So, the A20 Nexus is part of the Astral series within sound devices. So this is a digital multi-channel receiver. It comes stock as an 8-channel receiver, expandable to 12 or 16. So you buy or rent your licenses to be able to take it from an 8-channel to a 12-channel or a 16-channel receiver. The most impressive thing about this right out of the gate when you're looking at this is it is 1/2 rack space wide. So this fits into a 1/2 RU if you're familiar with building rack systems. super, super tiny, really efficient in space. If you're building things out, and space is an issue, trucking's an issue, portability is an issue, or trying to get it shipped around, this is just absolutely a fantastic piece to be able to kind of look at that as an option. And then just a mere 2.8 pounds on this unit. A nice front and back view of it. We're going to go through some of the ports here and go through some of the buttons on the front and back. But this is just a great view to kind of know what this hardware has intact. Standard headphone jack on the front. There's a turn dial, just one on the front of it. So this is going to be if you're utilizing the receiver to kind of navigate through. This dial also depresses, but it's also a rotary knob as well. So most of your navigation is going to be done via that. And then kind of our home button, if you will, is the orange button on the side. So antenna in on the front. And then I'm just going to blast through these real quick because I want to show. You also have antenna on the back. So the back antenna ports can be utilized as an in or an out. So the difference between these, maybe you've got your antennas terminating into the Nexus on the front. You can now utilize the back RF antenna ports to cascade, if you will, or just utilize this antenna out. So you've got that as a great resource and kind of put into the hardware as an added bonus. In the software, you actually dictate, though, say you're not utilizing the antenna out on the back. You want to utilize the back ports as an antenna in. Within the software, that's actually kind of where you'll dictate what's being used where. Let's go back one slide here. So dual DC power inputs, dual DC power outputs. And so the fantastic thing about this is if you're really worried about, redundant power, security, a lot of that kind of stuff, you can utilize the redundant PSU via dual DC and PoE plus. So whatever has the highest voltage coming into it is actually going to be your primary power source, and it's going to auto detect that. So the 2.4 gig antenna ports that you see on the back here are for NextLink control. I'm going to try to dive into this in a minute here into kind of its own proprietary thing. But NextLink, we're able to actually control all of our transmitters. The Astral series transmitters. So our A20TX and our A20 Mini, we're actually able to control these straight from the receiver. So if I need to make a change on the A20TX and the A20 Mini, and my transmitters are on my Talent, and I want to make a frequency change or an audio change or a power level change, I can do that from my receiver without being invasive, right? I don't need to access that pack, and that's because of this NextLink control. We talked about this. So analog out or AES out on the back of this is going to be done via the D-sub. So the DB25 connectors. So you can utilize this as 1 through 8 or 9 through 16. 1 through 8 and 9 through 16 on the top and bottom respectively. Or a fantastic feature is if you're only using 8 channels in this, you can actually utilize top and bottom as a redundant 1 through 8, which I've actually done on a show where it went to separate audio consoles and they wanted direct outs. So we were actually able to hit a monitor console and a record console from this analog out with the 1 through 8. Got word clock input on the back. RJ45s, you'll see that there's 2 of them on here. The great thing about these is both of those ports can be Dante control or Dante N control. So you've got a lot of options there. Within the software, you can make those changes as well, right? Do you want a standard, completely separate network for your Dante protocol and a separate, completely separate network for your control? You can do that here, or if you want them both. And then the one port on the right, you'll notice, though, is your actual PoE plus input port. You do have SFP protocol on the back of this as well. So you can utilize that for Dante and control. There's a USB A and a C on the back of this. The A is your home base, right? The A is where you can update your firmware. You can save kind of your settings that you want to save in there. you're actually going to sync your transmitters to Nextlink via this port as well. We don't really have any feature sets on the USB-C right now. So the A is the important one that you kind of want to be looking at. And that's where, almost all of your protocol is being done. So SpectraBand, this is a word that you may have heard. Every time we kind of talk about sound devices, this is one of the big kind of feature sets that are really going to come into play, and why this is such a really cool piece of hardware. We're actually able to access 169 megahertz to 1525 megahertz. So this is super, super wideband protocol. So now we're not having to kind of look at specific slivers that our hardware is limited to, right? We can actually take this stuff and go out in the field and be able to have access to whatever is legal in the range that you're actually operating in, right? It's country dependent, license dependent, just like we talked about earlier. But the good news is that you have access to all that stuff now in this single piece of hardware. So yeah, more frequencies, any given location. You've only got one piece of gear, right? Instead of a ton that support separate areas of the spectrum, this one covers it all. Worldwide traveling. So if you're traveling for shoots all the time, if you're on a tour, no matter what it is, you're going all different countries, you can set the Nexus to whatever country you're in, and it will help you support that show in that country based on its spectrum. So exceptional filtering. This improves immunity from strong interfering signals. I'm going to dive into that a little bit further, but for now we're going to keep going a little bit on SpectraBand. So SpectraBand in the US, a little bit more specific from the graphic we showed earlier of just in our spectrum, but this is lacking VHF. I do apologize on that, but this is kind of showing you some of the areas that the SpectraBand receiver, the Nexus receiver utilizing SpectraBand can use in the US. So all these different flavors, right? This is so great to be able to have access to all this kind of stuff. You'll notice that AvTrack at the end there, that 1435 to 1525, that is a very licensed kind of proprietary one-time use thing. You dive into that a little further if you need to. We're not going to get into that today, but that's super licensed and something that just you're not going to be able to access at any given point in time. SpectraBand in the UK. So you're going to notice some differences here, right? Which is why in our pre-planning we really want to make sure that we know the environment we're introducing ourselves into, right? Going back to the USA SpectraBand, and then now in the UK, drastically different areas that we're going to be able to access. So really wanting to just look at that kind of stuff. But again, one unit, we're able to access all of it. So huge, huge tool. So this is great. Let's go. Exceptional filtering that improves immunity from strong interfering signals. What does that mean? Why are we talking about that? This graphic right here is a wonderful example. This is actually what's happening. So our yellow line in this is our Nexus filter, right? So the other two lines that you see on this are other manufacturers' filters. So what we're doing here and what's happening within the Nexus is this is based on 10 dB per division. So what that means is the shoulders of the yellow line that you're looking at here is the drop-off points of the filter inside of the Nexus. So imagine that all of your mics that you're utilizing are inside of that yellow line. And when those shoulders drop off on that filter, by the time you get anywhere outside of that, you're down almost 40 dB outside of that filter, where these other lines that you're looking at take far longer to roll off, and those shoulders are way more broad in what you're filtering out. So, on my mouse here, imagine if there's, a mic or an IFB sitting at your soundstage or your festival or your concert, and it's sitting right here, just outside of the shoulders of this yellow line that I've got, right? The Nexus filter. we're filtering out 40 dB of that information that's coming out there. So you're basically non-existent. Now, if you're on some of these other filters utilizing that, these are great filters. And if you have access to these and you're not using a Nexus, you always want to be able to kind of filter out what you can for spectral efficiency. But it takes so much longer and so much more gradual to kind of filter out a lot of that stuff. So if you're looking at something that's in here, maybe those intermod products are getting over into your receiver and your microphone. So that's kind of what we're talking about with a lot of this stuff. So graph compares the steep roll off of the SAW filter. Yeah. So again, just, talking about super noisy RF environments, which, I mean, let's face it, everywhere right now is basically a noisy RF environment. So getting into these tools and really utilizing them is such a big deal for us. Man, I think I've said this 90 times already, but my favorite feature about the Nexus is that it already comes with a real-time spectrum analyzer built into it. So we talked about that in the pre-planning process. We talked about how important it is to actually see what it is that you're doing in the space that you're operating your mics on. Normally it's an external piece of hardware, but now we've got it in the Nexus. So we can actually show that too, right? Like if we turn our transmitter on and you're viewing this page in the Nexus, you're physically seeing it turn on and off, right? So now if you've got someone that comes in that, didn't advance with anyone in the area that you're operating your gear in, and you all of a sudden see something pop up, you're noticing that now on your RTSA. So you can make adjustments in real time based on the information that you have in real time, right? Such a powerful workflow there. Whereas before, maybe you don't have a spectrum analyzer open and someone turns something on that you didn't know was there, and now it's interfering with your microphone. How long does that take to figure out what's happening, where it's happening at, and why it's happening? So the fact that you have this built into the Nexus is such a powerful tool, and it also helps you just dictate what area you want to actually utilize when you get to your site. What area is the cleanest? What area doesn't have any other activity going on it? What area doesn't have DTV happening? So all these things are because of the RTSA. Being built into the Nexus is just fantastic, and a tool that I hope all of you that have a Nexus, have rented one, are going to use one, really utilize the power that holds for that product. So you're looking at this live while audio is decoding, so while you're actively using your microphones. And this also helps facilitate the auto assign function. So the Nexus users that already have this, you can open up your RTSA page, find the cleanest spectrum that you want to utilize. And then if you have 2, 4, 8, 16 microphones and you want it to auto assign, or maybe you didn't have the opportunity to utilize frequency coordination software, which I would advise, then you want to make sure that you can hit this auto assign button and it will auto assign your frequencies for you. While it's doing this, it's going to simultaneously, if you have next linked your transmitters to your Nexus, going to push those frequencies to your packs. So now we're talking about on-site deployment time being absolutely non-existent, right? We roll up to somewhere, we find our clean spectrum, we auto assign, and we're off to the races, right? Transmitters turn on, the Nexus automatically pushes the frequencies to your transmitters, as long as they're next linked to the Nexus, and we're up and running. So multiple reasons why we're using that RTSA or the real-time spectrum analyzer within the Nexus. Auto assign does the tuning for you. So I just talked all this, and just important to know that your Astral series TXs, our transmitters, are what's being benefited the most by the Nexus and these feature sets, right? So your A20 TXs and your A20 minis. So now we're utilizing gain forward. in these transmitters, right? So this eliminates the need to set preamp gain at the transmitter input. So you're not on the pack changing basically your input settings on the pack. You've got 130 dB of dynamic range here, so the entire signal from the mic is being sent via the RF link or your NEX link to the receiver. So that is an absurd amount of dynamic range that you've got available to you. You're basically screaming and whispering in the same setting on your transmitter. And then at the Nexus, you do have audio output adjustment, and you also obviously have your console or your field recorder or whatever you're utilizing to access all this signal. You've got your preamps on that to be able to utilize as well. But that's what we're talking about with gain forward. So let's see. Remember. And I apologize if I said this too. Audio is not sent over NextLink. That's over our RF transmission. Yeah. Oh, and then a big thing here too. I know we actually had a couple questions about just selecting what microphone with appropriate sensitivity, right? You can still clip a microphone and not necessarily clip the belt pack or the transmitter, right? So we always want to make sure that we're utilizing the right microphone for our application. So we are doing, we can have record on these. So depending on where you're at, this is a fantastic option. And just some of the specs on recording, 48K 32-bit float wave files. So super high fidelity recording that we get on a lot of these. And just a huge, again, asset to your kind of, let's call it arsenal of tools to be able to utilize on show site. And we can jam timecode via NextLink. So our NextLink control, we've touched on this, but this is kind of a good breakdown of what we're talking about with NextLink, right? So this is a 2.4 gig protocol, super, super long range. I've seen this thing work in just absolutely crazy environments and very, very long distances. But all of your control features is what NextLink is doing, right? So your packs on and off, your audio settings, your frequency settings, all that kind of stuff is being remotely controlled via this NextLink protocol. And until you have actually had a chance to utilize it, you don't understand just what a pleasure that is to have that on a show site. So NextLink utilizes a web browser if you don't want to control from the hardware or if you need to control remotely. So that's basically any web interface. So if you're on your iPad, your iPhone, your Android phone, your iPad, your Android tablet, computer, you name it, right? Anything that has a web browser, and you get the IP address off of the Nexus, you type it into your web address, and as long as your network is configured appropriately, you now have the web interface for control. We also have basically like a Bluetooth protocol for this on Android and iOS app to be able to control these transmitters as well. So another, no matter how you need to control this stuff, you have so many options to be able to utilize and make sure that your workflow is as efficient for you as it possibly can be. So A20 Mini, I'm just going to blow through these real quick just to see, because we're basically at the end here, and I still want to get in some questions if we've got more. So A20 Mini is their basically small frame body pack transmitter. Super tiny, super lightweight, full audio fidelity, 10 to 20K. Good to note that this one doesn't have buttons, switches, or dials, so it's very efficient for when it's going to be on talent a lot. You need a smaller pack and not have someone mess with a lot of buttons or controls on it. Ton of different battery options here that we've got for it. I'll keep that slide up for just a second. And then the Power Station 8M, which is a hard piece of hardware that you can get with the Nexus, that you can actually mount these A20 minis in that sled. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. Standard or double battery door to double your battery life. And all that is just simply changing the door on the transmitter, not a separate transmitter. Getting into some super slot receivers. So this is another receiver that you have separate from the Nexus. But this is basically being able to utilize in different options for portable applications, for those of you that don't utilize slot receivers on a lot of different bases. The A20TX, this is the newer belt pack that's out. This is going to utilize that Spectra band. It's important to note that the A20 Mini does as well. But this is going to be more of a full-size belt pack transmitter. Some really great things with this. 140 dB of dynamic range on this thing with the gain forward technology. So again, just taking into consideration fantastic audio fidelity and the robustness too of utilizing that dynamic range. Standard with a 3-pin LEMO connector, and then it supports so many things other than just lav microphones, right? So being able to utilize this is another tool for other things that you might not have thought as RF to be the right tool for. Guitar inputs, AES3 devices, AES42 devices, something that might need phantom power, really adding, to the arsenal again with a lot of these products. Different battery chemistries that we've talked about that you can utilize within this to kind of specific into the way you use your workflow. The big difference here too with this transmitter is that this one does have buttons. This one has haptic feedback to know that you're actually depressing those buttons. I also really love that this has the e-ink display on it. So when this belt pack is turned off, you can see the frequency, you can see the name, a lot of that kind of stuff. So really, really cool for just organization when you have a ton of transmitters, and a lot of really great feature sets that I'd really encourage people to dive into to really customize this. LEDs on, LEDs off. Do you want to invert the backlight on the e-ink, right? So black on white or white on black. A lot of different options there. I think we covered a lot of this stuff. Sorry, really just trying to power through here so you can look at questions. Power options, modulation schemes. This was an example of that Power Station 8M that I was talking about earlier. So you can stick in those A20 minis. 8 of them can go into this in this configuration. Or if you have the battery doubler door, you can fit 4 of them in this configuration. It's good to note that you can also jam time code from the rear BNC on this. And the antenna does stay intact to the belt pack while it's in the sled too, which is really great and super good for workflow. This is the bow tie style antenna we talked about earlier. So it's also passive, omnidirectional antenna. Not much to cover there on that guy, but super powerful antenna here just because of the full Spectra band capability, right? So thinking about where you're going to need to utilize something, and if you have an antenna that can support it, if you have a Nextlink or if you have a Nexus, you have one of these. So great tool to have with you. The Nexus Go is a really great little product. It's the Nexus, but it's the Nexus Go, so it's actually a smaller capacity channel count frame, right? So this starts as a 4 instead of an 8 and is expandable to 6 or 8 instead of the 12 or the 16. So cable-free mixer integration, tailored towards users who don't need a remote receiver, right? So if you don't have the high channel counts and you really are always with this unit, it's always in your bag with you or on your cart with you. Fantastic option here. One of the really big things, other than the channel count, that we really want to make sure is understood Same kind of spectra band tuning for all this stuff, but we are looking at so no Ethernet or SFP ports and no Dante PoE Plus or web app control. So again, if this is always with you and you're used to controlling from the screen anyway, and you just don't need that high channel count, then this is a great device to utilize for that. So you have the single DB25 rather than two of them. And you do have the time code capability still with this guy. And you'd also have NextLink as well. Front and rear mounted antennas again. Yep, so this is all the stuff we covered. And then here's just a really nice comparison chart, right, of all the Astral wireless. So summing up everything we've talked about in probably the last 20 minutes with the actual hardware, this is kind of what we're looking at for that. And I believe that is it for all of my slide presentation. Wow. So let's jump back here. We've covered a lot. So we've looked at kind of what it looks like in RF, what it looks like to prepare for a show, what it looks like to execute a show, and if Sound Devices has the right tools to support your show, and what you can do with that entire ecosystem put together and how strong that can actually be. So I'm kind of going to refer into here if there's any questions on that haven't been answered from the people that are monitoring chat. So let's see. Let's look at is there a difference between standard modulation and long-range modulation? Not really. So what you're going to have as far as the difference there is your latency. Standard modulation is going to be 1.9 milliseconds, and your long-range modulation is going to be 3.9 milliseconds. That's only going to be extraordinarily critical in some very specific situations. But you're going to get a more robust control and, RF levels and all that kind of stuff with the long range modulation. So really, if you don't have any sort of specific requirement for a super, super low latency system, long range modulation is kind of the mode you want to be running in. Let's see. For a live, non-scripted environment, NextLink seems like a great function, but if a cast member leaves a shooting unit and goes to another unit, is there a non-invasive way to transition the NextLink connection from one nexus to another? Okay, so at the moment, there is not a way to NextLink to multiple receivers, right? So that means we've got NextLink set up and running on two separate nexuses in different situations. We are definitely aware of that request, though. That is a feature that we're definitely aware of. So hopefully we can be on the lookout for something like that. We can refer to the Sound Devices people if that's something we're looking at some point in time. So what is the best suggested workflow for showing up to a location and deciding frequencies for your talent wireless while considering your camera hop, comms, transmitters in your bag setup? So yeah, I mean, again, a lot of this is going to be kind of situationally dependent, but this really is going to play into the band planning that we were talking about on one of those very first slides, right? If you know you're going in to a shoot and you've got your microphones, you've got your Nexus, and that's all you've got that in a nice, good bubble, and that's where you want it. You already have other stuff in mind. So if someone shows up with an IFB or with a camera hop or with any sort of thing, you already know where you're going to put those and kind of where you want those to live. So great question. But that's, again, a huge part of that planning process. And then the other part of that question is really just, what is the best looking environment too, right? So when you get on site, are you confirming the scan that you got with your spectrum analyzer and you're still happy with where you want to go? So are there any plans to incorporate the Astral Tech into the MixPre series or any way to connect the A20 Nexus Go to a MixPre 10 if possible? Yeah, I mean, so I think what we're talking about here is, the MixPre, just like anything, if you want to get the A20 Nexus Go or the Nexus utilized into the MixPre 10, you're going to utilize that DB25 connector on the back. So DB25 to XLR, and that'll pop right into your MixPre. So you're able to, record anything off of the Nexus into that kind of MixPre system, or any other USB pre or sound recorder that you've got. So always an option there to utilize those analog outs of the Nexus into your MixPre 10. So real quick, I know that we're over on time. I appreciate all of you guys being here, but I do want to drive home just one or two more things real quick. I'm going to pop over to what the web app looks like and kind of poke around on a few things there. And we'll kind of reference back to the question we had about just selecting an area and what kind of tuning band we want, auto assign, things like that. So let's pop over to this real quick and do a dive into here. So this is kind of an overview of our web app that we're looking at. So I am right now networked into the Nexus that I have here, and I've got one transmitter running. We know this is the live time. I'm going to power my transmitter down right now, and we see that go away. So this is why I'm saying that having a spectrum analyzer and having something that's real time is so important, right? If I'm operating, or I want to be operating in this and I haven't even loaded in yet, but I've got this running, and all of a sudden I see this pop up and I didn't turn on any of my stuff, I know now that there's someone in the area that is in the space that I'm trying to operate in. So does that mean I go work with them and we figure out how to share? Is there enough space in the area that I've selected for both of us to operate in? No problem, right? But maybe this was something that I already had something assigned to. How are we looking at that? This is how you know, right? From this RTSA. So this is the area that we were looking at in that very beginning graphics slide called the duplex gap. So this is in between our uplink and downlink. That's in the high 600 area, mid to high 600 area. So 652 to to 664. But so what we're looking at here is a super, super quiet area. Now, just so you guys know, I've got an Omni whip terminated directly into my Nexus rear port. And then I also have an omnidirectional antenna over on a stand on the other side of this room by my window, trying to bring in as much RF noise as I can because the room is secluding a little bit, right? So I've got it over by the window, and this part of the spectrum right here looks just super, super clean. So that's why I picked this. So changing frequencies really is just as easy as clicking and moving, right? So I've just selected and pushed the frequency to the pack on my talent just by the click of a button based on the information I see on this RTSA. Now, say that we want to change this, right? Say this area doesn't look very good and I need to move somewhere else. Well, we've got our tuning band options here, right? So this is the list. My Nexus is set to the US. And so this is the list of options that I've got for the US right now. So maybe let's just use 470 to 494. So it's going to tell us while we're changing tuning bands, it is going to stop audio, right? So we want to make sure that we're aware of this. We're never doing this in the middle of the show, just in our planning process. So I'm going to change the tuning band now. And now, here we are. We're looking at 470 to 494. So now you can see that I've got 3 DTV stations. Some of them are lower level than others, but I've got these showing up here in my scan. So, I've got a little bit of room to work here. Let's say I'm really happy with, 476 to 470. So what we're going to do there is I like this area. Maybe like on the last one, I've manually picked where I wanted it. So say that was my frequency coordination software told me that I was going to do, right? So my frequency coordination software said to put it at that frequency. I clicked it, I put it there, everything was fine. Well, say we didn't have the ability to utilize frequency coordination software. What I want to do here is actually, whoops, sorry, wrong button. I'm going to actually auto assign. So now what I'm doing is I'm telling the Nexus that I want it to auto assign something for me in this area. So we're going to go ahead and let it do that. It's going to let me know that it's going to stop so it can look for what it needs to be. And there we go. So it successfully assigned one channel in the auto assign function to this clean area of the spectrum. Now, based on a lot of factors, but predominantly we're looking at where our noise floor was sitting at, right? But a lot of different factors there. But so auto assign feature, super great if you need to throw and go. One other thing we've got too, maybe you don't know what you're looking for, right? Like you didn't know that this was DTV, right? Or you didn't know maybe that was noisy enough or what it was. There's a function in here. We've got scan mode, right? So we're going to click this. Now, what's happening here is we're going to be looking at, there we go. Sorry, button mashing here. So now what we're doing is we're looking at a wide scan, right? So now this is showing us what we're going to see in our environment. So we have all these different tuning bands that are basically these 24 meg chunks predominantly that we're going to be able to isolate to be able to utilize that fantastic filter within the Nexus. But that means that when we're looking on that side of things, we're only looking at 24 meg at a time. Well, in the scan feature, we're now seeing the wide scan of what we're looking at here, right? So we've got everything from 470 up to 494 in our scan here. So now this is going to help us make a really good decision on where we maybe want to start honing in on. And where we can really look at some areas that we know look super clean. So this tool is just as important, right? This is another one of those tools where we're utilizing the RTSA, but we're also utilizing the scan function so we can kind of have a wide overview of what we want to look at first, right? So I just zoomed in now to this area that showed kind of a null. So I wanted to see what maybe this part looked like. So you can scan in on this. Sorry, you can open your scan and you can zoom in to really make the best educated decision. So I probably didn't say it right away. So when I'm looking at this and I wanted to look at this area, if I'm selecting this now, that's where it just set my tuning band to. So now I'm looking at this in the RTSA view. But still basically zooming in, honing in on this area. So now if that's the space I wanted, and I also band planned for this area, then I can go ahead and assign my transmitter and it's locked and running. So really is a great way to look at that environment and utilize those tools. I am about 20 minutes over right now. So I apologize. I'm still looking, just making sure I covered any questions. If we needed to, I'm going to let the team let me know if we're done here. But we'll just bounce through these 4 couple tabs real quick. So yeah, if anyone wants any final questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. but otherwise not. I'm just going to show you these pages real quick and then we will be done. So this is just your overview. I've got this one loaded with 16 channels, so I see all 16. This is our first one that we're actively using right now. So we're seeing our next link. We're seeing our RSSI, frequency, battery life, and these are indicating next link. We can click into it and get kind of a microscopic view of that transmitter. This is where we change some of our settings. A lot of stuff to dive into here. Our overall transmitter list. If I had a bunch of transmitters on this rig, you'd see them all here. Audio outputs is where we're utilizing that DB25 connector. And, if I wanted to utilize whatever kind of combination of stuff, this is where I would do that. On the audio side, we did a brief overview in RF settings here, your tuning bands, RF history. So what we want to see on that global overview page of the history, how long we want it for, and what parameters we're actually monitoring in that history. Antenna inputs, front or back. And then if you're utilizing a smart antenna, we can dive into here and really get into the meat of those. But that's another conversation for another day. Just security on this thing, do we want to lock it out? And basically our power options. So, man, I can't thank you all enough for having me. I really appreciate it. This was a ton of fun. Hopefully I didn't bore you guys. If you're just now waking up, I'm sorry. If you got something out of this, then I'm super grateful. And you can always reach out to us for questions. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day. Good luck out in the field, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.